Hello, my name is Alison and I'm the founder of HoneyBadgerRadio. This video is entitled, How Men Do Mental Health Right. I hope you enjoy this content. Campaign Against Living Miserably, or CALM, is a feminist-founded and run charity that deals with men's mental health. CALM's founder, Jane Powell, said, "So often their own worst enemies, men need new rules for survival. Outmoded, incorrect, and misplaced male self-beliefs are proving lethal, and the traditional strong, silent response to adversity is increasingly failing to protect men from themselves. Men need to talk before they hit a wall in crisis or feel they are at the end of the road," she added. "The normality of women freely discussing their troubles is undoubtedly a factor in declining rates of female suicide and underlies the need for a gender-based strategy in suicide prevention. So far, government and society has failed to act on the self-inflicted but preventable slaughter of our husbands, partners, brothers, and sons." CALM's mental health initiative believes that it's toxic masculinity, the expectation placed on men by other men, that men be stoic, that they regard themselves as responsible for solving their own problems, that they look to themselves for solutions, is a toxic masculinity, and it's toxic masculinity that's to blame for men's suicide epidemic. I think the logic goes, men objectify women, which leads them to disparage women's ways of knowing, which further leads them to not avail themselves of women's superior methods of mental health management. So if men could just respect women more than they respect other men, they would stop killing themselves so much. I'm going to offer an alternative perspective, one that I never hear. What if, just for the sake of argument, what if men are doing mental health right?
I'm so sorry, patriarchy, but as they say in baseball, you're being replaced by women.
Believe me, I would love for someone else to rule, but it can't be you. You're just...
We were in charge for a while, but we kept fucking it up.
the worst.
If you're listening to me now, and you like our content, and you have the means to support, please ask yourself why you don't currently support. If it's a reason we can address, send your responses to topic@badgerpod.com. And if you do ask yourself, and the answer is, I'm gonna support, you can find all of our options for support here at www.feedthebadger.com. And if you further ask yourself and say, I also want to support other men's issues initiatives, CAFE is putting on their annual Men's Issues Conference in Calgary this June 9th. It's in danger of being shut down due to lack of ticket purchases. I've put a link in the low bar to where you can support. If you can attend their event, please purchase a ticket. If you can't attend, please support through a donation. The HBR community is very powerful in its generosity. If anyone can make sure cafes as an event is a success, it's you. So go do it. In the 1970s, Tom Golden was a new graduate from psychology. He'd been looking for a job in his field for a year and was finding it difficult when he was offered a position at a counseling center for death and dying. He was the only male therapist on staff, and the 17 other female staff started to refer the male clients to him because they didn't want to work with them. The women told Tom, men don't grieve, and they don't deal with their feelings. At first, Tom applied the techniques he'd learned at grad school to his new rash of male clients, but while those techniques worked with female clients, they didn't work with male. Tom started to think the female counselors were right. There was just something wrong with men. Of course, that isn't the end of the story. Over time, Tom realized that men just grieved and healed in a different way than women. They focused on doing instead of talking. One man decided to write a novel about his son who had passed away, interviewing all of the people who knew him. Another carved a bust of his deceased wife. Men processed their grief through action. A few years ago, I spoke with Tom on a show about men's mental health, and on that show we spoke about the challenges facing men when it comes to depression and suicide. I remember saying, Because of the expectations we place on men as a society not to talk about their issues and to man up, they end up less resilient when it comes to dealing with their mental health issues. Tom replied, "You're doing exactly what the feminists do. You're expecting men to act like women." Tom was right. I was doing what feminists do when I suggested men should cope the way that women do, by talking, even if I put the ultimate blame not on men, but on society and the pressure women place on men to be stoic. In 1996, a group of researchers decided to look into the risk of suicide for doctors relative to the general population. They had a suspicion that it was greater for doctors, and their suspicions were confirmed. Doctors do indeed have a higher rate of suicide relative to the general population. After all, doctors have to take responsibility for life and death decisions regarding their patients, an extremely stressful situation, particularly when you have to tell a patient that he may only have 6 months to live. But these researchers also found something else very startling. The suicide rate for male doctors increased, yes, but the suicide rate for female doctors increased even more than men's, to the point where male and female doctors were committing suicide at the same rate. When you apply the same mental health stressors, being a doctor, on women and men, women's suicide rate increased 2 times more than men, which suggests women aren't coping better than men at all. Circumcision, loss of child custody, having a social identity contingent upon service, selective service, not having emergency support for domestic violence and rape, greater levels of incarceration, fewer options for social support, etc., etc., the list goes on. All of these men's issues represent a significantly greater mental health burden on men than women in our society. Services like CALM can't accept this because the reality is in fundamental defiance of feminist theory, in which women are oppressed and men are privileged and advantaged. Therefore, CALM has to promote the idea that men are doing mental health wrong, and women are doing mental health right. To see not just how ridiculous, but potentially a violation of medical ethics this is, let's apply the logic CALM is using. The fact that stoicism is higher among populations that commit suicide more often to, say, wound healing. CALM, the physician group, would notice that there are more white blood cells at a wound site in some people, but since CALM doesn't, feminist conjecture forbids it, because men can't be facing more mental health stressors than women, men can't be wounded more than women, so this physician group can't control for the severity of wounding, and it infers that it is the presence of more white blood cells that leads to worse outcomes for patients. They get the causal arrow reversed. Severe wounds means more white blood cells, and it is the severe wounding that leads to worse outcomes, not the presence of more white blood cells. CALM doesn't look at long-term outcome either, comparing a population of people who suffer an equal level of wounding, but seeing who in that population survives and heals best, those who produce more white blood cells or those who produce less. If we applied the logic behind feminist conjecture, ignore potential confounds and independent variables in favor of assumptions based on your shit-for-brains belief system to wound healing, feminist doctors would give white blood cell suppressing drugs to people with grievous injuries. And of course, the inevitable deaths from feminist medical idiocy would be blamed on hemiarchy and toxic white blood cells and wound privilege, all because CALM can't science. So instead of men needing to do mental health more like women, maybe women need to do mental health more like men. Toxic Charity is a book by Robert D. Lupton. It's subtitled How the Church Hurts Those They Help and How to Reverse It. Robert Lupton is the founder of FCS Urban Ministries. He's one of the many Christians involved in ministering to the poor who are questioning service-based charity in the spirit of self-reflection and offering long-term help to the poor. Lupton says, "Giving to people in need what they could be gaining from their own initiative may well be the kindest way to destroy them." Lupton describes his Presbyterian church mission to a remote Honduran village. The villagers were an isolated people, struggling daily to survive, and the church leaders of the mission decided that they would make this a long-term mission and build a true partnership with the village. The initial visit to the village revealed the need for a source of clean water. Women had to carry water from miles away for their families and households. The church had contacts with well-drilling engineers and money to cover the costs, so they came in and drilled the well for the villagers. When the first fresh, cool water was pumped to the surface, there was celebration in the village. The villagers thanked their benefactors profusely. The church had truly changed their lives. The next year, when the church returned, the missioners observed women trudging up the same road, carrying the same water jugs, full of water they'd been carrying a year before. Baffled, they asked around what had happened at the village. The well had broken down, and the villagers, who had no hand in drilling it, financing it, or setting up the pump, had no ability to fix it. The ministry team quickly set about fixing the pump, and once more fresh water flowed to the surface. The following year, when the ministry team returned, the same thing had occurred. The pump was broken, and the women were hauling water. Year after year, the pump would work for a time, then break, and the villagers would wait until their benefactors returned to fix their well. Those who question toxic charity calls this the poverty of being. They emphasize how people in poverty describe poverty not just as a lack of material things, but a lack of ability to do one for oneself, or a lack of belief that one can do for oneself, a lack of belief that you can solve your own problems and make your own life better. Toxic charity only makes poverty of being worse. Lupton describes a second village in Nicaragua. Its circumstances resembled those of the one in Honduras. It was remote, poverty-stricken, the villagers subsisting from day to day, and the village had a similar need for clean, fresh water. And one man in the village, Don Blas, dreamed of building a well. His vision was dismissed by the others in the village as the dreams of an old man, until one day a community developer from Chicago, Elizabeth, heard what he had to say. Elizabeth decided to help Don draw up a business plan for his dreamed-of well. She assisted the villagers in finding information on drilling and material costs. She helped them with a budget and arranged for a loan, conditional on the villagers drawing from their own meager savings to pay it back. She connected them with a reliable Nicaraguan engineer and helped organize a water commission to oversee setting fees, bill collection, and the overall management of their new utility. The village men provided the labor, digging the trenches and laying water pipe. When the pump was switched on and the water surged, the entire village cheered. They celebrated their accomplishment with pride. They found out that they had more than enough water for themselves and started to arrange contracts with the local government school and adjacent villages to supply water to them as well. The villagers, inspired by Don's dream, now not only had just fresh water, but a wealth-producing asset for their village. And none of what happened in Don's village was charity. The original idea wasn't a solution outsiders decided upon. It was Don's dream. The villagers weren't given anything except assistance in organizing their own assets, and a loan that was expected to be repaid. That wasn't charity. It was a partnership. And at the end of the day, the village that received charity has nothing to show for it, but a broken well and women still hauling water up a hill in pots. The village that did not receive charity but assistance organizing their own assets not only has water, but a profitable business. Lupton calls the approach taken in Honduras a needs-based assessment. Ministries using a needs-based assessment look at the communities they want to help and ask, "What's wrong with you? And how can I fix you?" Lupton advocates that all ethical charity interventions should avoid needs-based assessment in favor of asset-based assessment, the kind of asset-based assessment used with Don's Nicaraguan village. And additionally, Lupton says to follow several basic principles. 1. An ethical charity should identify the assets, not needs, of a person or community that they want to help. 2. An ethical charity should never do for an individual or the community what the individual or community can do for themselves. 3. An ethical charity should focus on building up a sense of self-reliance. In my last installment of this series, I covered what I call the negative-sum game. Simply, the negative-sum game is the phenomena that when we recognize male victims of a social ill, we lose compassion for all the victims, male and female. So if a problem affects 50 women, we're eager to help. But if we see it also affecting an additional 50 men, we don't double our compassion or even split it. We stop caring about all 100 victims, including the 100 women. The negative-sum game is an aspect of toxic charity. Truly compassionate people care about all the victims of a social ill, not just the aesthetically appealing ones. And they recognize you can't solve a problem by addressing only half of it. But that's not what the negative-sum game is about. It's about creating a narrative in which the charity giver swoops in and saves the destitute and unfortunate woman, thereby increasing his own status and self-regard. It's impossible to present this bit of theater with visible male victims. Men who are incapable inspire contempt, not sympathy. They represent the charity giver's own potential frailties as a man and the possibility he could be a victim. So women will be presented as the only victims, and utterly incapable victims at that. Charities, competing for those charitable donations, will seek to minimize male victims and maximize the impression that women are being targeted because they're women. This also draws in the female donors. Thus uniquely incapable, these women are uniquely incapable and uniquely in need of a male benefactor. This is the exact opposite of an ethical charitable intervention. It breeds generations of poverty of being in women, women who are incapable of understanding self-reliance. The social effect of this toxic charity on women as a group may be one reason, maybe the main reason, why women have worse mental health outcomes when experiencing the same mental health stressors as men. Like the first village, the Honduras village, women are fine as long as they have someone else to fix their well. But as soon as it breaks, as soon as they're in a position where they have no outside help to rely on, in fact, they're the one being relied on in the case of doctors, they suffer because they can't rely on themselves. There's no reason to believe that men's way of doing mental health is harming them, and at least some evidence to suggest it's protective against negative mental health outcomes relative to women's. The real problem is that men are dealing with more mental health stressors than women. It also becomes apparent that Jane Powell's calm violates every single principle of ethical charity when it comes to men. Like an arrogant, contemptuous do-gooder on a mission of so-called mercy to an impoverished community, Jane Powell committed the first sin of toxic charity. She decided before she even left her house that the community's needs were what she thought they was. And those needs were based on her own self-aggrandizing belief that as a rich Western woman, she's coping fine. So she must be the gold standard for doing everything right. Jane decided men were in need of fixing. That's what she based her charity on. Jane never even considered that maybe women have better mental health outcomes. And as an aside, Jane actually means wealthy, Western, mostly white women, because women in rural areas and in developing countries use stoicism as a coping strategy significantly more. One story of Mexican women in a commune comes to mind. The women would sleep on the ground and wake up with rattlesnakes nestled on their stomachs. So what did they do? They cut off the snakes' heads and fried them up for breakfast. Every problem is an asset, depending on how you look at it. Jane never considered that maybe wealthy, mostly white Western women experience positive mental health outcomes from talking about their problems, because when privileged people talk about their problems, there are other people who come in and fix them. Women do fine as long as someone else is doing for them. When there isn't someone else to do for them, they stop doing fine. She didn't consider that perhaps the men's community is already experts at coping. They're just coping with more issues than she, as a wealthy Western woman, could imagine. She never went into men's communities and identified the assets they bring to mental health. I doubt she even really talked to men at all, except for the ones who confirmed her own beliefs that men were in need of fixing. Jane would have looked at the Honduras village with its broken well and concluded that complaining about their well being broken is what fixed the well, not the missionaries, the complaining. Jane would further condemn Dawn's Nicaraguan village as having toxic self-reliance and well privilege for fixing their own well instead of complaining it's broken. Maybe Jane's real problem is that self-reliance means less reason to embrace toxic charity, or that all of this points to the fact that when women complain, they get help. When men complain, they're told to help themselves. Nowhere does Calm actually consider that the expectation that men be in control leads to women having better outcomes when they complain about their problems, because men fix them for women. They fix their problems. So the same situation is not going to work for men unless they have a group of people, women, to appeal to help fix their problems. And they don't. Look at all of these adorable posters and coasters Calm has made to help illustrate what's wrong with men, men's culture, and their current methods for coping with mental health issues. From Calm's website, we believe that there is a cultural barrier preventing men from seeking help, as they are expected to be in control at all times, and failure to be seen as such equates to weakness and a loss of masculinity. Ironically, Calm doesn't actually challenge the idea that there are issues outside of men's control. Looking at their materials, they only mock and belittle men for putting pressure on other men and themselves. I don't see any woman pressuring or woman forcing, or any recognition that women enforce gender norms on men in Calm's clever little coasters, or that women benefit from having men always be in control, because when they complain, they have somebody to complain to. Calm upholding the taboo of recognizing anything outside of men's control is best illustrated by the absurdity in Robert Webb's How Not to Be a Boy. Robert Webb is an author, and that's a book that Calm sings praises of on its website. In one chapter, Robert describes in detail how fear of judgment from his girlfriend and his dead mother prevented him from seeking out mental health help. And then, in an astounding demonstration of lacking all introspection, contradicts himself in the same chapter by blaming lad culture for him not seeking mental health help. Let's just run through this again. Calm was founded and run by people deeply invested in the fantasy that men control all aspects of society. And patriarchy fantasy is a fantasy. It has been proven to have no scientific validity, as it has failed to demonstrate predictive power multiple times. So people deeply invested in magical thinking about how men control all of society are the ones who say that they're going to challenge the expectation that men are always in control. We're here, folks. This is peak insanity. Now, ethical charity is about identifying the assets and coping skills communities already have. It's obvious that Calm fails that test abysmally in relation to men's health. But that's to be expected. The real question is, am I creating learned helplessness in men by pointing out the issues that they face that aren't under their control, but are systemic issues, the result of a system that's failing them? What if I'm offering men toxic charity? What if I'm doing everything wrong by bringing attention to men's issues, or working for a world that cares about men in the same way the world cares about women? Am I the one offering men toxic charity by saying there are issues beyond their control? Am I turning men into a victim group?
Men don't need help. They're the patriarchy. They're fine, more than fine. But are they fine?
Are they? Are they fine? I mean, how are you, Jim?
Pretty good. I got my own TV show, so...
Tucker is finally just saying what we've all been thinking. Men really are the weaker sex. The patriarchy was a fluke. I mean, think about it. For centuries, women have endured shitty dudes groping us in the workplace, and groping us while running the country, and groping us while taking away our health care. And we're still thriving.
You know, sometimes you just gotta get pissed. I can self-reflect until the sun burns itself out, but at the end of the day, I don't want this woman to be the kind of woman who gets to define men. I don't want to see her empowered to spew her sleaze. And unfortunately, calm support for false narratives that make men responsible for all of society, including their own issues, gives women like this a pulpit. So fuck it. Maybe I'm doing everything fucking wrong, but sometimes the only response is anger. Anger at the lies and bullying.
This was super feminist. Men in America was basically just a detailed list of all the reasons why men suck and women are great. But don't worry, guys, you're still good at some stuff, like opening jars and overdosing. It's as if all men are Popeye and the ability to fondle your secretary is your spinach. Like,
unlike Jane Powell, I can recognize the role women play in putting pressure on men to conform to the masculine ideal of control, because I can see the benefit to women. I can recognize the asymmetrical influence women have over men's identities. Laura is bullying you. She's using her power to define your desirability as a man, to shame you. Meanwhile, like Calm, she'll completely deny that she has that power, or any power, and she'll call you a misogynist for saying she does.
this isn't a battle cry. It's really more of a battle. We were in charge for a while, but we kept fucking it up.
When Elizabeth came to Don Blass's village to help them realize a better standard of living, she didn't come to give them charity. Don's village did not believe they could realize Don's dream of a well. Elizabeth believed that they had everything they needed already to do it. She believed in their ability to cope, even if there were circumstances beyond their control. They had survived them, meaning they had tremendous grit and strength. She believed in the assets they already possessed. Elizabeth believed in them, and that's what they needed to build their well. All those commentators who say I'm taking away men's ability to cope by pointing out that men's issues are beyond their control, I call bullshit. Being able to distinguish what you have control over from what you don't is where real solutions come from. I'm not turning men into a victim group or a victim class. I'm not giving men charity. If you're here listening to me now, you are far from a charity case. You are tough enough to bear witness to men's issues when most men can't. The rest of the world can't look at these issues without screaming like little girls and running away, pissing their panties, and hiding behind lies and snake oil and canned laugh tracks.
Men seem to be becoming less male fundamentally, measurably. Sperm counts, for example, across the West have plummeted. They're down almost 60% since the early 1970s.
Yep.
Yet you can. You can stand up under the emotional barrage, the existential horror that cripples others. Strength is a matter of perspective. In our society, a strong man is one who responds to the negative-sum game with a feverish drug compulsion. He saves women like a mindless puppet jerked along by strings of his own ego and need to be perceived as strong. This is what our society sees as strength.
But Laura, Tucker Carlson is taking Women's History Month and making it about men. You didn't find this offensive?
Men on top like Jim don't define themselves by what they share with other men, like men's issues, but how they are superior to other men, like men's issues. Men who succumb to men's issues, according to Jim, are just losers, and Jim's a winner. And the worst losers of all are men who say that men's issues are beyond men's control. Those men take away Jim's sense of being superior to all other men. Jim didn't win, he's just been spared, briefly. And Jim doesn't like that kind of talk.
The idea that men are victims is the core of the men's rights argument.
Jim may represent society's idea of strength, but he doesn't have true strength. True strength is facing your vulnerabilities and turning them into assets. Women like Laura don't see you as strong because you introspect, you deliberate, you doubt. You recognize places where men do not have control. Your ability to doubt yourself is a strength in a world that needs to doubt itself. and doubt its convictions, because those convictions are going to destroy it. Your ability to see the data others refuse to look at is strength in a world ignorant to its own undoing. You're not a charity case. Far from it. You have strengths our world can't even begin to comprehend. Can't comprehend because your strengths exist outside of everything they know should work. You exist outside the negative sum game. The force that defines Jim's entire existence, the force that will destroy Jim's entire existence. That might as well be a mutant superpower you've got right there. So I'm not offering you charity, and I don't think you'd want it anyway. I'm offering you a partnership. I believe in your strength. I believe in your ability to cope. I believe in your grit. I believe in you. You have the assets, and like Elizabeth and Dawn, I have the belief in those assets. Being able to bear witness to men's issues is like being able to stand up under constant fire, fighting through that recognition to build. It's what makes you bulletproof. I have a powerful thirst to find out what exists beyond the negative sum game, what a society strong enough to bear witness to men's issues can do. Let's find those real solutions. Let's build our well together. Oh, and wipe the smug off their faces. www.feedthebadger.com. Now on to some business. I'm currently researching the next installment in my negative sum game mini-series. If you're interested in the books I'm reading, they are The Rise of Rome by Anthony Everett, 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Collapsed by Eric Klein, War and Gender by Joshua Goldstein, and the next installment next installment of the Negative Sum Game series should also serve as an overview of some of the history and social dynamics I'll be covering in Deprogramming Women. And for those of you who are eagerly waiting for that, here's a short preview. Using the Corvus and reverse engineering Carthage's own naval technology, it took Rome 4 years to go from a nation with virtually no navy to defeating the preeminent naval power of the age. This was an astounding feat, and with it, Rome gave Carthage a black eye and humiliated its great general, Hamilcar, father of Hannibal. If you would like to help us out, please go to www.patreon.com/HoneyBadgerRadio. Having a monthly income allows me to budget for our expenses. Our next goal is to free up Prim Reaper to do a weekly men's mental health show. If we can get to 7,830 per episode, which translates to over 9,000 a month through Patreon, I think we can do it. And if you don't like Patreon or find the whole per episode issue confusing, you can pledge per month at www.feedthebadger.com. Oh, just a second. I want to thank Kay for this. I have not yet pressed the button at the center of Pepe's chest to find out his commentary. So I'm going to do that now. All right, so let's do this once at least properly. There we go. It just keeps going. All right, thank you, Kay, for the lovely Pepe doll.